when the first soldiers came into our barracks, I was saying to my friends, I said, what kind of a guards are they sending us now? Because I have never seen an American soldier. These guys had different uniforms, the American uniforms, but I didn't realize that these were American. Well, when the American soldiers saw the starved people there, they gave them all their rations, whatever they had. They gave them all their food, whatever they had. They gave them chocolates. They took the very sick people, like myself, put us on stretchers. They brought us in to Weimar. Weimar is the next
Herman, how much did you weigh when they liberated you?
55 pounds.
Hello and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. I've told you many times I've traveled the world over and met some wonderful, wonderful people. And they've inspired me and motivated me in ways that I could never do justice to by telling you about it. And I have such people on this show today. They are two people that I have known dear to my heart. One, a daughter who I've known for many years, and her father, who I've known through her for many, many years. Wonderful people living here in South Florida, living the life of Riley, as they say. But it always wasn't that way. We are celebrating now the end of Passover. It's the end of midway in Ramadan, and Easter week is over. So the three great faiths in the world have come together to say thank you to God. But the world is not all good people. There were evil people in this world also. And some of them committed the worst atrocities and Holocaust known to mankind. And our guest today, Herman Haller, is not only a witness to it, but a survivor of it. He lived through it. And yet today we see him on the screen next to me, in front of, smiling next to his daughter, and behind him, that sign that I love so much, the Star of David with the dove with the peace symbol in his mouth. To me, that represents people who understand the gifts of God's love, knowing that we must go forward, not forget, but forgive. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Herman's life story, which I just told him he should make a book out of, and perhaps someday I can help him do it. So Herman, welcome to the show. And Heidi, Cherry, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carl.
I am so pleased to have you on. I feel honored that you would be a guest on my show. Herman, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your beginning and about your story, because no one can tell it like you can.
I was born in Berlin in 1924. That makes me 98 years. And my parents, unfortunately, were divorced. When I was a young boy, I was only 6 years old, so I hardly knew my father. But we had a furniture business. My family, all my family was in that furniture business, and my mother was able to continue to run the business with the help of her brother. And I had a younger brother that was 2 years younger than I myself, and we attended a public school. Soon in 1933, when I was just about 9 years old, the Nazis took over the country. They won the election, and that was in January 1933. And we attended the public school. Soon after that, the Nazis made a decree that Jewish children could not attend the public school. So we had to go to a Jewish school. And of course, there was no shortage of teachers, because the teachers from the Jewish teachers from the public school also had to go to the Jewish school. So we attended this Jewish school until 1938. Well, there was an incident that I can never forget, that as soon as the Nazis took over it was in January 1933, and in April 1933, they made a boycott of all the Jewish businesses, all the Jewish shops. They were standing in front of the shops with with signs around their neck which said, "Don't buy by Jews. The Jews are our unfortune." So, but soon after that, they came out with different laws, different regulations against Jews. For instance, we had a beautiful park where we used to go all the time and play, but they said that they, they put up yellow benches just for Jews. But soon after that, they even took away those benches and they said Jews are not allowed to go to the park altogether. So constantly, every week came out with different rules and regulation against Jews. Now, it got worse. In 1938, November 1938, it was November 9th, it was the famous Kristallnacht, which they called Kristallnacht because they broke all the windows from the Jewish shops and the glass was flying all over the street. And that's why they named it Kristallnacht. The shop, our business was broken into to the windows, and the furniture and belongings was thrown out in the street, and some of it was stolen. And well, my mother had a sister, which is my aunt. She had two little children. She was very worried about them. So she asked me to take my bicycle and ride over to my aunt's house and find out what's going on. So as soon as I got outside, I could not ride the bicycle anymore because the streets were all littered with glass from the broken windows. And down the street there was a synagogue. So they had tore all the books and benches, and they tore them out the window in the street, in the middle of the street, and made a bonfire. So finally I arrived at my aunt's house, and there again, their store was also broken into, the same like by us. And there was a mob outside because in where that store was, in the courtyard from that store, there was a synagogue. And the synagogue was on fire. The fire department was there, and the police department was there. But the fire department poured water on the adjacent building so that it would not catch fire and let the synagogue burn. Well, I mingled among the people, and I found out that my aunt and her two children were safe. So I wrote back to my mother and told her all about that. And then, of course, there was no way of earning a living anymore because the store was destroyed. And so the Nazis made a ruling that the insurance companies that we were insured for the windows should not pay that money to the Jewish people. But the insurance company said that we cannot do this because these insurance companies were big companies. They had businesses outside of Germany, and that would give them a bad name, that they would not pay for what we used to pay premiums. So what they did, they decreed that they should pay this money to the Reichsbank, to the German bank, so that the Jewish people would not get this money. And on top of it, they fined the Jewish people 1 billion marks for the damage that they did, that we have to pay
clean up the streets.
to replace everything. And you could not leave. Nobody was allowed to leave Germany unless he could show a paper from the Internal Revenue Department that he paid that we paid our share from that fine. So my mother was very worried, and she had a younger brother, who had already obtained a visa to go to the United States. And he was waiting in Belgium, in Antwerp, Belgium, for his ship from the Holland American line to take him to New York. So she got in touch with her brother and asked him to help us to get out of Germany. Well, they devised a plan. He went to the railroad station and bought a railroad ticket from Berlin to Paris in return. The return ticket was very important. That was the main thing, because we had no papers, no passports to get out of Germany. So she went in the middle of the night. That's when the train left. The train made a stop in Brussels, Belgium, and over there in Brussels, my uncle and my aunt would be on the station and wait for that train to come in and take us off the train.
So let me ask you, that was you and your brother,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you were how old at the time?
I was I was 15
So
years old.
just a teenage boy with his little brother traveling alone in the night.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you can imagine what my mother was feeling to take the two children and going to the railroad station. We would never know if we would see each other again.
Right, right.
But, well, when the train arrived at the border between Belgium and Germany, the German guards came on the train and asked for passports. We, of course, didn't have any. So we showed them our identity card, which was stamped with a large J to identify us that we were Jewish. And we showed them the return ticket to Paris. And we told them that we were visiting a relative in Paris, and then we would come back. That's why we had this return ticket. Well, anyway, there were two guards. So one said to the other, "Well, let the French worry about them." That's how we got through the border into Belgium. When the train arrived in Brussels, the my uncle and aunt were at the station, and they took us off the train, and we stayed in. They took us to Antwerp. That's where he was staying in a rooming house, which is about a half-hour ride from Brussels to Antwerp. There's a special train that goes back and forth. And so we arrived in Antwerp now, and now my mother. So my mother had to get out too, but she couldn't use the same scheme that we did. So what they decided that it would take her, she should go to Aachen. Aachen is the border town between Belgium and Germany. And in Aachen, they would meet a guide. They would pay him, and he would take him over the border into Belgium. Well, when my mother did that, they were caught at the border, and they sent them back to Berlin. So now my uncle said, you got the return tickets, you could go back. But since you're out from Germany, stay out, and you will have to find another way for my mother to get her out. Well, and my uncle, like I said, he had papers, a visa, and he had a ticket already to go to New York. We was waiting for that ship to come in, so we couldn't stay with him. Well, anyway, my my mother had, through her sister's husband, some relative in London, England. They found out that there was a shortage in England of domestic help. So if you could show that you had a job in England, the English government would give them a visa to go to England. And this is what my mother did. And she received a visa like that. And she was able to go out of Germany legally to London. Now, we were now in Antwerp, Belgium, and my uncle had to leave. So they contacted a distant relative in Paris and asked him, his name was Emmanuel, they asked him if he could help us to, to, to get out. So we were in Belgium, of course, illegal because we didn't have no visas to go into Belgium. We went there to a scheme. So this Emmanuel, he was a French citizen. And as a French citizen, he was allowed to go to cross the border back and forth with no visas at all, because between France and Belgium, they were friends. They didn't require any visas. So he came to Antwerp, picked us up, put us on the train with him, and we rode. He came to the border, and he showed his French papers, and the border patrol says, "Who are the children?" He says, "Oh, those are my children," and I left them alone, and we went out. We got to Paris. Now he had a little house outside of Paris in Brunoy, outside Paris, and so we stayed in his house. We didn't speak the language, and the French Sûreté, that's the French police, when they caught somebody, they would send them back to Germany. He was afraid to let us go outside. So we stayed approximately 3 months. He stayed in his house there. In the meantime, my uncle had left to New York. But he said, this Emmanuel, he said, it would be better for you to go back to Belgium, because in Belgium, the police is more lenient. They would not return you to Germany. So this is what we did. He took us again on the train, and we went back to Antwerp. And when we got back to Antwerp, he dropped us off at the Jewish committee, and there were hundreds of people that were similar condition that we were in, but we were two children, so they could not leave two children by themselves. So what they did, there was an agreement that they asked people to take in children. And we were, unfortunately, we were taken in by a family that did not do it for goodwill. They did it for money, because the American Joint Distribution Committee in America used to send money for this purpose, and they used to pay these people. So we stayed in their house, and it was not very comfortable, but anyway, we in the meantime, my mother had gotten this visa to go to England. So she was in London. She was working with that family, and we were able to write to each other. But then in 1940, it's less than 2 years, that the German army occupied Belgium, the Holland and Belgium and France. Within 2 weeks, they occupied all these countries. They called it a blitz, lightning, because there was motorized equipment. The Belgians didn't have a real army. I remember that they put machine guns on taxi cabs to shoot at the airplanes. but which was, of course, was ridiculous, but that's what they had. So now many people from Belgium, including the people that we were staying with, they started to walk to, to France because they thought that France was a big country, that the Germans would never occupy France. But of course, the French had this called Siegfried Line.
Yeah.
There was a defense between borders, and the Germans overran that Siegfried Line like nothing. Within a few days, they were in Paris. So people started to walk back, and the people that we were staying with, they came back, and now they didn't get any money anymore. They didn't pay them from America because the war was going on. So they actually throw us out in the street. So we were helpless, but my brother was lucky. A good family, took him in, and I was then by myself, and I had to look for some work, which we was not allowed to work. I was not even allowed to stay there, but I tried to get work, and I did find a job in a bakery. This bakery used to be a nice bakery in peacetime. They had they had a coffee shop. People could go in there and eat cake because they used to bake cake and bread and rolls and everything. But in the wartime, they were not allowed to bake anything else but bread. And it was, of course, rationed. And that because of the ration, we could not even get ration cards because they wouldn't give two children ration cards. They thought that we were trying to scheme to try to get extra cards, but it was very difficult. But anyway, I had this job in this bakery. I was sleeping on the bench where they kneaded the bread, and I had to feed the ovens with big logs of wood to keep the ovens warm so that during the night that the fire shouldn't go out, so they could bake bread again the next day. Also, this went on for a while, and the Nazi regime made the same rules in Belgium, not only in Belgium but all the occupied countries, the same like they did in Germany. They made the Jewish people wear the star to identify them that they were Jewish, and then they want this. They advertised and said, "Well, if you come to Germany and come to work, we will feed you and even pay you because the German, all the German young people were in the army, so they needed workers." So they said. But we soon found out that some people that really went to Germany, they took that spiel there because they had no other means to make a living. So they thought that they would help them. But we soon found out that these people never came back. We never heard from them again. So we didn't go. Nobody went. Then so they had to. What they did, they surrounded areas and captured people and made them register. All everybody had to register with this Jewish agency. Well, anyway, one day they got a hold of me, and I had to report. And they took us to the train station, and they sent us to France. They sent us to a camp, which was not like a concentration camp. It was a work camp. As a matter of fact, they made us build this camp. They gave us logs of wood and tents, and they dropped us off in an open area. It, to build a wall, the Atlantic Wall.
Yeah, the North
We had to
Atlantic
work.
Wall.
Germans built a wall from Norway to Holland, to Belgium, to France, a huge war with concrete, reinforced with steel, because they thought that if the Allies would invade, they would come from that side, because from the area where we were in France, you could see the English coastline, because it was 30 kilometers distance. Because they thought that the Allies would attack from that side, but of course they didn't. They came from Normandy to Italy, and later then from that side too. Anyway, the conditions was very, very bad. We had no water, we had no facilities, no sanitary facilities. So myself and four other guys, it was five of us, we caught typhus from the lice and things, no sanitary conditions. So they took us into Boulogne, which is a town next where we were. They put us up in a hospital, a French hospital and a civilian hospital. And the French doctors, they made room for us in their basement, and they gave us a clean bed, which we didn't have for weeks. We didn't sleep in a clean bed. But they cured us, they put us back to health. Typhus is very, very big. We have very high temperatures. And but like I said, the French doctors were good to us. They helped us and fed us. Anyway, after about, I would say, 3, 4 weeks, we were well enough. One day, the guards that guarded us to build this wall. They came and said, well, we don't need you anymore. We will send you back to Belgium. So we were very happy. We thought, really, go and send us back to Belgium. This is good. So they took us on a train again. But we first put on a truck. We went with the truck to the campsite, and we saw the camp was all broken up. And the people were lined up in groups, and they took us to the railroad station and put us on trains and sent us back to Belgium. When the train arrived in Belgium, in Brussels, they didn't let us get off the train. What they did, they attached another train onto our train. And this train had women and children and old people that they had arrested while we were away. And it sent this whole train straight to Auschwitz. When the train arrived in Auschwitz, we, we had to get off the train, and they said, well, you are now in an area where you're going to work, and we're going to feed you if you work. And whoever cannot walk, you have to walk to the campsite, which is about another mile or two. And whoever cannot walk should stay. They will come trucks. They will take you on trucks and drive you into the camp. And whoever can walk will march into the camp. So while we were standing there, we saw other people that were there already. They were wearing uniforms, striped uniforms. And what they were doing, they were sorting out the clothing that the people brought with them on the train, because they didn't know where they were going. So they separated the clothing, and they told us, walk, walk, walk. At first, we didn't understand what they're talking about, but soon we found out, because that's what they said, the guards. They said that anybody can walk will march into the camp. Whoever cannot walk will stay. We will come with trucks and bring you in. Well, as it turned out, the people that could not walk never saw them again. They took them straight to the gas chamber and killed them all. The whole transport was almost 1,000 people. It was 945, I think 900, or close to 1,000 people. From this 1,000 people, after the war, we had only 45 men survived. The rest was all killed. Well, once we got into the camp, they shaved our head, the hair, take all our hair off, put the numbers on our arm. Yeah,
Yeah. Your new name, 72556 554.
that was my name. They said, and they put us to work there. First, we put to work to build a factory. This factory was built for Krupp. You know, Krupp is a big armor manufacturer.
Yeah.
But today they're making coffee pots and washing machines. But in the war, they made armaments. This factory was making an igniter for a anti-tank weapons. That's what they was manufacturing in that factory where they sent us. Everybody wanted to work in that factory because the factory actually saved my life because you were protected from the elements. The people that had to work outside, you didn't have a chance to stay alive long because Auschwitz is in Poland and it's very, very cold over there.
Cold. Yeah.
And so everybody wanted to work inside. So what they did, they gave you a test. Yeah, they were looking for mechanics to fix the machinery and all that. So they, they gave you a test, put a piece of steel in a vise, give you a file, and tell you to file this. And how you handled the tool, they could see if you were really a mechanic. So I had a friend that told me, you know, I was young then. I was 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. Yeah. And he said, you know, you tell them that you were an apprentice. You were an apprentice on the outside and you wanted to be a mechanic. So they took me inside the factory and I worked in there. Well, one day I was I was working on the night shift. Yeah, the factory was working around the clock from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, and then from 7 at night to 7 in the morning, around the clock, every day, Saturday, Sunday, holiday, every day. So one day I was working on the night shift. So I got up early in the afternoon, wanted to go out and look for some food. Because the food that they gave in the nations was insufficient. This is why I was trying to get some food. So I was got up earlier and I went downstairs. I was on the upper floor. The barrack had 2 floors. So as I got down, I see an SS guard come into the building. And I was, when we saw such an SS guard, we were required to stand at attention and yell out, attention. And and just the guard turns around and he said to me, what is your name? I didn't realize his, his intentions. I said, Herman Haller. He says, what is your name? And then I realized what he meant. So I had to say, Jew under protective custody, number 72554. He says, aha, I have to teach you to remember your name. Follow me, he said. We went upstairs. I had to follow him. He sit down on a table and had another prisoner shine his boots. And he said to me, you give me 100 knee bends and count out loud. I started to count, I got to 20. He says, I can't hear you, start again. So I start again, I gave him 100 events. Then he said, now give me 100 more and count backwards. So I gave him 100 more, counting backwards. Then he said, well, lay down on your back and gave me 10 push-ups. So I could hardly make it, but I did. And then he said, turn around your stomach and give me 10 more push-ups. I couldn't move anymore. So he took out his pistol and put on my head. He said, you give me 10 more push-ups, I'll shoot you right now. So the last strength, I was able to give him 10 push-ups. And in the meantime, all my friends were standing outside. They were waiting for me because I had to go to work. So he, after the last push-ups, he says, get out. Raus, he said, raus. I went outside and I said to my friends, I cannot go to work now. I won't be able to stand. They told me, you have to go to work because if you're not going to work, they're going to kill you. They're going to send you to the gas chamber. So we had to march out in columns of 50 in 5 rows, in 5, 5, 5, 5, 10. Right? So they put me in the middle and they supported me from both sides. Were able to march out of the camp to that
Saved your
factory.
life.
On me?
They saved your life.
Yeah. So we got to the factory. So I was working in the machine shop. In the machine shop, in the back of the machine shop, there was a section where they had ovens where they used to harden material, the steel that they made machine parts for the factory. We had to manufacture everything over there because you couldn't. There was no way if one of the machines broke down and needed a part, they couldn't go out to the store and buy one. We had to make it. That's why they had the machine shop, and they had to harden this steel in the ovens. But during the night, this section of the factory did not work. There was nobody there. So they opened the door, put me inside the cabinet, a tool cabinet. They put the tools inside, and they made me crawl in there. And that's all. You rest in there. That was my hospital. I was called inside there, and it was dark. And during the night, I hear the door opened up, and 2 engineers, German engineers from the factory that they had sent from Germany to supervise the manufacturing stuff. So these 2 guys, yeah, they wanted to smoke a cigarette. So they opened up the window. They had these push-up windows. The windows were painted black. It was so that the airplanes could not see if there was a factory. Well, anyway, from that window, one could see the crematoria, the chimneys from the crematoria with the fires and the smoke shooting up to the sky. And I could clearly hear one said to the other one, siehst du, wie die Juden brennen? He said, can you see how the Jews are burning? And I was in that cabinet there, my heart, my pants. But they didn't look for me. They went, finished their smoke, and they left. They went out. So that's how I was staying in that so-called hospital till I was well enough to go out and work. And the guys, my friend, they said, they were looking for me. They would check for me. They would come and get me. Well, this went on He stayed in that factory till 1940, no, 19, no, January 1945. That's when it was. January 18, 1945. I'll never forget that. The Russian army was moving up in the east. We could hear the artillery shooting. Every day it got louder and louder. So the Nazi guards, they got scared. Oh, they were scared of the Russians. They hated the Russians terrible. What they did to the Russians over there, so they were afraid that they would do the same
Afraid
thing.
of payback.
Well, anyway, they decided to evacuate the camp. They took us out right straight from the factory. They made us march for 5 days. We marched through the cold and snow to a town where they put us on open cars, coal cars, open. They had no covers. We rode on that car for 7 days, back and forth, back and forth. They put that train. And they had, and when another train was coming with troops, they put our train on the sideline to let that troop train pass. So that's why it took so long, because the train finally arrived in Buchenwald, in Germany. Buchenwald was another concentration camp.
Yeah.
At that time, on that car where I was, we had 110 to 120 people in that car. When it arrived in Buchenwald, there was only 7 of us alive. Most of them froze to death. Starvation from cold. Was no water, no food. I was lucky again. I was on the side of the wall of the train. So when it snowed, I used to scrape the walls and eat the snow. Was many people drank their own urine because they needed water. Million water, because one could live without food for several days, but you need water. Well, when the train arrived in Buchenwald, which you said was another camp, the prisoners from that camp came and took us off the train. Like I said, there was only 7 of us alive anymore. And they took us off. This camp had a lot of German prisoners in there, not only Jews, but German citizens that were against the Nazi regime. They put them in a concentration camp. Well, they couldn't even take my shoes off. I had boots. They had to cut them off. My feet were frozen. My toes had almost fallen off. Well, they tried to help us as much as they could, but they had no equipment. Bandages with paper. Well, luckily enough, after we arrived in Buchenwald, didn't stay long there, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. The American army had moved up in the west, and the Americans liberated Buchenwald. When these first soldiers, I was so sick that when the first soldiers came into our barracks, I was saying to my friends, I said, what kind of a guards are they sending us now? Because I have never seen an American soldier. These guys had different uniforms, American uniforms, but I didn't realize that these were American. Well, when the American soldiers saw the starved people there, they gave them all their rations, whatever they had. They gave them all their food, whatever they had. They gave them chocolates. And I tell you, many people died. from eating the food because they could not digest it anymore because the intestines shrunk. But they took the very sick people like myself, they put us on stretchers, and they brought us in to Weimar. Weimar is the
So
next
Herman,
town.
how
Yeah,
much did you weigh when they liberated you?
55 pounds.
55 pounds.
55 pounds.
Walking skeleton.
But they put us into Weimar into a hospital, into a German hospital, and German doctors. They had to take care of us. And those German doctors and nurses, they said they didn't know anything. They didn't know from a concentration
Yeah,
camp. They
nobody
didn't
knew
know.
anything.
As a matter of fact, General Eisenhower was then the commander-in-chief of the Liberation Army. He made the whole town of Weimar march through Buchenwald and see what is going on there. They made them take the dead people and bury them properly. Yeah. As a matter of fact, the mayor from Weimar shot himself and put a gun to his head and killed himself. Well, anyway, like what happened now, we were in that hospital, and the Allied forces, they had a meeting before the end, just before the end of the war. They had a meeting with Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin, and they wanted to decide what are they going to do when the war was going to end. So they decided that any refugee is free and can go wherever he wants to go because there were millions of people were displaced because the Nazis took people from Germany and sent them to other countries and sent people from the
From all over Europe, yeah.
countries, sent them to Germany. It was a whole mix-up. Anyway, they decided anybody can go wherever he wants to go. So Belgium had sent a commission to Buchenwald and asked for citizens. And I said that I would like to go back to Belgium. And I gave them the address where I used to live. And they said, okay. So the American soldiers, they put us on stretchers and brought us to the airport. They stripped our clothing off and burned everything because we were still full of lice. And they gave us new clothing. And what they gave us was German fatigue uniforms. But it was brand new uniform. Fatigues, not uniform fatigues. Anyway, we flew into Belgium, into Antwerp, into Brussels. They flew into Brussels and they distributed us into hospitals. I was in hospital St. Gilles in Brussels. And the people was hundreds of people were standing on the airport. They were greeting us and gave us flowers, gave us money, and they were happy to see us. And of course, they're asking, "Did you see this guy? Did you see my husband? Did you see my friend?" It was sickening, but he could not walk. He put on stretchers, like I said. He was in the hospital. The hospital took very good care of us. We stayed in the hospital about 4 weeks, and then they put us up in a home. The Queen Mother from Belgium had given one of her home outside Brussels, given to us to recuperate. I stayed myself. I stayed there a whole year. I was walking first with crutches, then with a cane, but while I was there in that home, I was able to contact my brother, and I found out he was still alive, and he was able to go in hiding in the Ardennes. That is, the Ardennes are the mountain areas in Belgium. That's where they had that famous battle in the Ardennes. The
Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, right, the Battle of
Battle
the
of the
Bulge.
Bulge.
And of course, they were afraid to go in there because the resistance was there. They wouldn't have a chance. But anyway, he was able to hide in these mountains, and I was able to contact my uncle in America. Was able to contact my mother, and my uncle in America sent me papers to come to America. My brother did not want to go to America. He was a Zionist. He wanted to go to Israel,
Israel, yeah.
Palestine. He went in one of his illegal ships at that time. Palestine was occupied by the British.
Yeah.
It was not Israel.
And they would smuggle them in on boats. I know. I know a man who was the captain of one of those boats. He was a Jewish man from Canada, and he volunteered when he was just 17, 18 years old. And he smuggled the people in and out of Palestine.
Well, when that ship was caught by the British patrols off the coast of Haifa, and they sent him to Cyprus.
Yeah.
Put him in a camp in Cyprus. But anyway, he was able to get out. He was still alive.
You ended up in the United States on a farm in New Jersey with your uncle.
Yeah.
It must have seemed like paradise and being ostracized into the country all at the same time, because you were a city guy, right?
Yeah, my uncle, he had a chicken farm. I didn't like too much the chicken farm. I was
like it
the
either.
city
When
boy.
I was a boy, I used to work on a chicken farm in Long Island. We'll talk about that another time.
I went to New York to my other uncle, and he had a store. He had gone to the army, and when he was liberated, he opened a business. He had a furniture store, juvenile furniture and toys. And so he told me, you can stay with me as long as you need.
And then you joined an association and met the love of your life.
Yeah, well, that's right. When we stayed there, and I had all kinds of jobs. And I joined this organization. It's called the New World Club. And that's where I met my wife. And we were married for 73 years.
God bless. I know she recently passed, and she was the love of your life. I've seen pictures of her. She had such a glow about her all the time.
She was a good woman. She was a very good woman. She was one in a million. It was very good.
Well, you deserve it after what you went through.
It was your reward after what you went through.
Yeah.
That you had a nice wife.
Yeah.
A great wife, not a nice wife. A great wife.
Great wife.
Well, I was able to get a job with the Transit Authority, and I was still working there for 20 years. And we worked in the Transit Authority. I was able to buy a home, and we had a car.
And you had two beautiful daughters.
And then we had
Thank you, Carl.
And another, I don't know the sister's name.
Elizabeth.
Heidi and Elizabeth. Carl. So Heidi, you've been sitting there, and I've been watching your face through this whole thing. I could see the pain you were feeling at certain points when your father was relaying what he's been through. And you've probably heard these stories many times before, and yet still the pain is there.
You know, Carl, it's interesting. The very first time I ever heard any story, I was an adult woman. I had been working. I don't think I had my own child yet, but I was working, and I was definitely over 35 years old, and maybe in my 40s. And Steven Spielberg had decided that he was going to he was going to film a lot of Holocaust people and
in Florida.
Holocaust survivors. Right. Well, no, this was in New York. I was working in Washington, D.C. My parents were living in New York. He was, this was way a long time ago. And he decided he was going to do films, and the filming was going to take it took like 4 or 5 hours for each person. And they brought a film crew to my parents' house in Queens. And who never took off a day from work, I went to my boss. I said, I need a day of vacation leave. I'm going to take off. I'm going to fly to New York because I want to be there when they come. Not that I'm going to be in the room, but I want to be there when they come.
Sure.
So I was at my house, stayed at my house, and I'll never forget, we had a small row house in Queens, in Flushing, Queens, and they had a galley kitchen. And I was in the kitchen, and the film crew was filming in the living room. They were there for hours, and I'm not lying to you. I was lying on the floor, listening with my ears to hear things that I had never, ever
I
heard
can imagine.
before.
It must have shocked you.
They turned off the doorbells connected, the telephone was disconnected, so they could film everything.
Yeah.
And I have a copy of that film.
Because you were the first Holocaust survivor in America, the child of the first generation of a Holocaust survivor in America. Not the
Yes,
first ever, but the first in your family.
right,
You're the first
exactly.
one whose father or parent survived the Holocaust, and you were born in America with all the so-called advantages.
Exactly.
And he worked hard and never told you about this.
No, he never said a word about any of the stuff. And I can tell you that even as a little child, I knew about the Holocaust, but I didn't know any details. I didn't know anything. It was something that was just not spoken about. We just didn't talk about it.
Right.
And then around 1985, when Yad Vashem was in Israel, that's when my father decided that he was going to go to Israel, to Yad Vashem. And it was such an unusual thing for my parents to travel, to take a trip out of the country. They never did. They never took any trips like that. And my father said that he had to go to Yad Vashem because he had read that someone was going to put an ad in the
paper.
Go ahead.
There was an English professor put an ad in the paper. They would give $10,000 to anybody that could prove that the Nazis used gas to kill people. So this woman, she took him to court. As a matter of fact, she won the case, of course. But when I heard that, I said, I have to go to Israel. At that time, they had organized a world gathering of people. There were 10,000 survivors from all over the world that joined this trip. We came to Israel, and he wanted to tell the world that it did happen.
Absolutely.
And they had told us that we have to make a tape of our experiences and bring this tape to Israel, to Yad Vashem, which is the museum in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And we had to bring this tape to there. And that was something.
I listened to some of these people, and some of them currently too, because the ugly face of anti-Semitism is raising its head again in places around the world. Anti-Semitism, anti-Christian, anti-faith of any kind, ugly people with the intention of creating a master race for the whole world. These globalists who think, a handful of elites are going to run the entire world. And I listen to those things and I think to myself, when people say never again, they mean never again. You cannot allow that kind of thinking to go unattacked. You got to speak out against them. Every human being, every thinking man who understands not only that the atrocity happened, but people are trying to lie to these younger generations and tell them it didn't. We have an obligation to teach them, for them to learn and to know that the world is a beautiful place, but it's got evil people in it. And you cannot allow any government to take so much power over its own people that it could dictate down to camps and the elimination of human rights and the right to speak and censorship. All of that stuff has to be stopped. We cannot allow that. We can't, for the dignity of the world, we cannot allow that.
Well, I can tell you that while we were in the camp, we used to talk after work. We used to sit and talk with our friends. Just one of us has to survive to tell the world what would happen. And we would say, well, they will not believe you. They will not believe you.
Yeah.
He said that right there in the camp. There's no
Well, I
hope.
tell you, Eisenhower did a lot to prove it to the world. He went in there with the news crews. He filmed all of that. He insisted that the world pay attention to it. He took those citizens from that German village and brought them up to witness it and never be able to lie and say they didn't know, dig those graves. And he spoke out against it over and over again. The problem is, it's so many years ago. And we have so many of these people in charge of children today in our school who are teaching them about all kinds of ridiculous other things. And they're blotting out history. They're lying about history, that it didn't exist. Well, it's up to us, people like you and me with the white hair, to make sure stories like this are told. And that's what I have this show for. Tell the stories, tell the truth, be an example to the younger generation and guide them, help mold them. Because if it's not for us, if not us, who? And if not now, when? I know you've heard that before. Breitbart said it there in Germany. He said when they came for the gypsies, nobody said anything. When they came for the intellectuals, nobody said anything. When they came for the Catholics, nobody said anything. When they came for the Jews, nobody said anything. When they came for me, there was no one left to talk. And that's the way it is. So we have to do our part, every one of us. So people, I'm talking to you right now, not these two beautiful people, because they know it. I'm talking to you people who are watching this. Share this story. Make sure people know. Speak up. Anytime you hear something that is filled with hatred, anti-Semitism, anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, anytime you hear that anti-crap, talk out against it. Because, when you talk about genocide, the Turkish people tried to do it with the Armenians, and they killed millions of Christians. In Rwanda, they killed millions of people because they were of a different tribe. But the biggest tragedy in the history of the world was allowing the Nazis to get away with what they got away with against the Jews in Europe. Their intent was genocide, and I believe they killed off over 80% of all the Jews in Europe. The remaining few that are left today need to be. This country must always be a friend of Israel. Always. We cannot allow it not to be any other way. So, you heard me on my stage here. I get a little rambunctious about these things. Herman, I got to tell you, I admire you so much. I really do. It's an honor to have you on this show.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, I appreciate that you take your effort to publicize this.
I got some people we'll talk to. I was telling you earlier, I just talked to another man, a doctor who wrote his father's book. And there's a publisher called Amsterdam Press that specializes in stories of the Jewish story, and especially the Holocaust survivors. They specialize in it. So they will help you put it together and publish it and stuff like that. I'll get the names for you, but we'll do that offline. Ladies and gentlemen, if this story doesn't move you, I mean, maybe you can't see it right now, but there's tears in my eyes. And I'm proud of those tears because that means I'm a human being. We can never let it happen again. Never. So I do these kind of shows every Wednesday. I bring people on that can help motivate you and stir you and move your heart to action, because we must take action and tell your story. I know you have your own story. No one can tell it like you can. Write it down. Share it with your friends, your relatives, people that you know. Make sure that the younger generation hears what you have to say, because when it's too late, it's too late. When you're gone, they'll lose all that information. They will never gain from what you have to give them. Take action. It's time. The world is coming to a very close end. It's time. And I tell you what I tell you every week. I know I'm a big blustery guy, big guy like me from Brooklyn. Love somebody today. Take them and give them a big bear hug and tell them you love them, because there's not enough time not to. Tell people you love them. It's an important part of life. I love you both.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
guys.